It was an unusually cool evening in September when my son Richard and I started to put up the new scarecrow. The latest storm had blown the last one away, and we needed to protect the wheat from the crows and sparrows. My daughter, Lucy, had decorated it herself. She wanted it to look like me, so she chose some of my old work clothes, and my old cowboy hat sat peacefully on its head. Hopefully there wouldn't be another storm until after the last harvest. Once we had finished, we took a moment to admire the straw man. "Looks mighty fearsome, Pa." Richard wiped the sweat from his brow. I had let him do most of the work. "I reckon it'll do the job for the next few weeks," I supposed out loud. "Now hurry up and head inside. Mama's got supper cooking and you need to wash up." Richard took off towards the house and left me alone with the scarecrow. I pushed up my hat to get some of the cool air on my scalp and stared at what we had made. Lucy had done a good job dressing up the straw man. I spit into the dirt and put my thumbs in between my flannel and suspenders, in true farmer fashion. In the distance, I could hear our German shepherd, Rover, barking at Richard. As I pondered our financial situation, we needed this harvest. Supper had been brisket, cornbread, mashed taters, and sweet tea. It was my favorite, and my wife Marceline knew it would cheer me up on days like today. The tax man came earlier and told us that the government would no longer be subsidizing the excess wheat, which would leave us in financial ruin if we didn't sell at all. After our nightly prayer, we ate dinner in silence. The sounds of knives and forks scraping plates had eventually subsided. "Richard, help your sister with the dishes, and then you both head up to bed. I need to speak with your ma in private." I watched them collect the plates and head to the sink. Marceline and I stepped into the den. I poured myself a tall glass of scotch to ease the nerves, and waited for the children to head upstairs before talking business. "What did Sheriff Taylor say?" she asked me, sounding more than a little concerned. I took a large sip and sighed. "He said they don't need the extra hands over the winter." I spoke quietly. "He said to check again in spring, and then I can put in another application." I'd been looking for any work I could find, but nobody in rural Nebraska was looking to hire an old farmer. If I couldn't find anything, we'd be forced to sell the farm, which had been in my family for generations. "Well, maybe you can ask another department." Marceline was kind and hopeful, more hopeful than me. I wasn't typically a drinking man, so my head was already starting to spin. "I'll find something eventually. Everything always works out for us." I tried not to sound as dejected as I was. I don't think she bought it. "Come on upstairs and I'll cheer you up real quick." She smiled her wonderful smile and giggled like a schoolgirl, so I embraced her with all my might. "Let me just put some wood in the furnace. It's gonna be a cold night." I kissed her gently on the lips. "Don't you go starting without me again." I couldn't contain my wicked grin. I always hated going into the basement. Ever since I was a child, my older brother would tease me that there were monsters waiting to get me there. The wood furnace didn't help, as it looked like a giant man-eating monster itself. I never stayed down there long. Normally I'll just have Richard go down for me. The stairs creaked as I walked down. It helped that the moonlight pouring in from the ground-level window illuminated the entire scene. I grabbed a couple of logs from the distant corner to put in the furnace when the moonlight was cut off. It was just for a moment, as if someone had run past the window. I got goosebumps, but assumed it had simply been a bird or a cloud flying over. That's when Rover started barking outside. I dropped the wood and ran back up the stairs. Richard had heard the commotion and had been standing on the stairwell with Marceline and Lucy. "Get back upstairs," I commanded. "Go on, get," I added when they were frozen in fear. Lucy had started to cry when Rover's barks got louder and vicious. I went to the kitchen and grabbed the double-barrel shotgun we kept there. I scrambled to find the shells in the nearby drawers, as we never kept the two together. Rover's barking suddenly cut off and was replaced by a quick yelp of pain, and then there was silence. I cursed loudly when I couldn't find the shells. I yanked the last drawer out completely, spilling random junk all over the floor. The box of cartridges hit the ground, sending them flying in every direction. I I grabbed two and hurried to the front door. As I was struggling to load the 2 shells, I found Rover. He had been laying just in front of our porch. Blood leaked out of the open wound in his neck and he was completely still. He was clearly dead. The wheat in the field just ahead shook as if something was running through it. I took aim and fired both chambers blindly, but whatever had killed Rover was long gone. Sheriff Taylor came out with a couple of his deputies to search the scene. Of course they didn't find anything, not even a single coyote. The only thing out in the field was the new scarecrow. The deputies left to write their report while Taylor stayed to chat. Marceline poured us some tea and let us be.
I'm sorry about your dog, Bill. Beautiful creature. Annie and I just had to put ours down last fall.
Sheriff Taylor took a sip from the tea. He had been woken up in the middle of the night to come look at a wheat field, a scarecrow and a dead dog. What do you reckon did it? I asked. I had no interest drinking the tea, but I sipped some anyways, purely out of habit.
Well, I say odds are a group of coyote got real hungry and desperate. Food's been real scarce lately, and making them bold. They killed a few of Miss Comstock's chickens a few days ago, torn right apart.
He finished his tea and placed the glass down on the table. I reached over and put it on the nearby coaster that he had seemingly purposefully ignored. Thing is, I interjected, Rover weren't torn apart. Something up and tore out his throat and just left him there to die. Didn't even bother to take another bite.
Well, you did come out guns a-blazing. Shouldn't be doing that, by the way. You probably just scared them off before they could.
Taylor retorted. He spoke lazily and was completely uninterested. My blood began to slowly boil, but I knew there wasn't much I could do. Sheriff's word was law around these parts. He could say the sky was purple, and we'd all have to say, yes, sir, a mighty fine shade of purple at that. Once his mind was made up, that was it. He left without thanking us for the tea. The next few days at the farm went by like a gray haze. The children had quietly been sulking while doing their daily chores, and even Marceline's cooking couldn't cheer us up. I can't blame them, as we had Rover since he was just a pup. His ma had been my older brother's dog, and he gave us one of her pups before he left for the city. To distract myself, I worked out in the field more and more. All the while, I couldn't shake the feeling of uneasiness, as if something was watching me toil in the dirt. I brushed it off as simple paranoia. For some reason, the feeling was worse the closer I got to the scarecrow. The straw man hung helplessly on its makeshift cross, but I couldn't help but eye it with my peripheral. It glanced in my direction before turning its head back. Did it just move? My head shot towards the scarecrow, and I saw that it was simply staring forward. I must have been seeing things. It was almost time for the harvest, and I was probably just stressing myself out. I still wondered, though. More often, I found myself turning to the bottle to help get myself to sleep. Nerves were getting worse as I realized that winter might come early and ruin the whole haul. That would put us in the poorhouse even sooner. I didn't tell Marceline that we might be screwed. My head spun as I struggled to fall asleep. Marceline snored lightly beside me. I stared into the ceiling, waiting for sleep's embrace, but it never came. Instead, I heard a blood-curdling shriek come from Lucy's room. It was shrill, full of fear, and it sobered me up real quick. After what happened with Rover, I kept the shotgun nearby and loaded at all times. I found it right where I had left it before laying in bed. I picked it up and ran as fast as I could towards Lucy's room. When I entered, I saw that the room was empty and that the window was open. Out in the wheat field, I could see something running and hear the sounds of Lucy screaming in fear. Without hesitating, I jumped from the second-story window. My right ankle cracked loudly when I hit the ground, and pain shot up through my leg, but I wouldn't let that stop me. I must have broken it. "Lucy!" I cried desperately into the night. I limped through the wheat field and listened for her reply. I wouldn't dare fire blindly into the night this time.
"Daddy!"
She screamed wildly. It was so far away. I tried to keep up and constantly called her name, but every cry back sounded further and further away. Eventually, there was no response at all, except for the echoes of my voice in the field. I didn't know what to do. I was lost. Sheriff Taylor came again, this time with all his deputies. They scoured the endless field searching for any signs of Lucy. In the end, all they could find was a bloody piece of her pajamas nearly buried in the dirt. The feds came after the initial sweep was unsuccessful. They promised to find her as quickly as possible before they left. Taylor stayed to get as much information from us as he could. Then he started inquiring. No good comes from Taylor asking questions.
You know,
Taylor was scribbling into his notepad.
95% of the time a child goes missing around these parts, it's one of the parents.
He lifted his head from his pad and eyed me.
Tell me, Bill, just how much did you have to drink tonight? You smell like a damn brewery.
I couldn't hold back the contempt I held for him anymore. I took a swing at him and took out one of his teeth. He brought me into county lockup as quickly as he could, despite the need for medical attention. I never did see my daughter again. 2 weeks had passed since Lucy had gone missing. Marceline got it in her mind that it was my fault and took Richard to her mother's house. I was alone for this harvest, and there was no way I'd be able to get all of it in. I was going to have to sell the farm for sure. I figured I might as well collect what I could before winter took the rest. The boot I wore around my ankle didn't help at all. Doc said I might never walk right ever again. I toiled in the field, harvesting the tall wheat stalks for hours. As night began to fall, I happened to walk by the old scarecrow. Dread filled my belly whenever I went near it, so I always tried to stay away. Silly of me, I know, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I stared at it for a long moment before heading home. The last few days had been warm, but the cold air that would ruin me had been slowly creeping in from the north. I had to go to the basement to put firewood in the furnace. As the basement steps creaked under my weight, I saw a black outline laying on the floor. For some reason I had assumed it was Lucy returning home, but as I got closer, I realized what it was. It was the straw man that we had put up, but all of its clothes and hat were missing. It had been covered in dust as if it were laying there for weeks. I froze in fear as my mind processed what I was looking at. Then what the hell is out in the field? Hey guys and ladies, thanks for watching. If you want me to tell your story or read a creepypasta, email me at the address in the description. Come follow me on Twitter and Instagram at CoreyRhino. Be good to animals, even people. Sit.
Ja, snämar, Bergsbes, Rish.